I remember when the stars still obeyed the Emperor's will, when every sunrise burned with the certainty of his light, and even the void between worlds hummed with his unspoken promise. We live by the rhythm of faith, by the measured pulse of the Astronomican that stretched like a golden thread across eternity. To believe was to see, to doubt was to fall. Yet somewhere between one breath and the next, that light faltered. I felt it vanish, not as a flicker, but as an absence, a silence so complete it felt like being forgotten. Our world was still, the heavens unchanged, yet every prayer echoed hollow against the vaults of cathedral. The hymns continued, but they rang false, like voices singing to an empty throne. And in that stillness, the question I was never meant to ask took root. What happened to faith when the Emperor can no longer hear it? The Auspex readings told us nothing. The priests called it interference, a test of endurance, a veil to strengthen the soul. But I have copied the same litanies 1,000 times, and I know the shape of faith. This was no test. This was abandonment. And so begins my record, not of heresy, but of remembrance. For if his light no longer reaches us, then I must write what it means to live in the dark. If you still believe the Emperor watches, then stay. Bear witness to this chronicle, and let it spread, like a flame pass from trembling hands. Like, share and keep alive, for faith is a story told again and again until the silence ends. At first, none of us noticed when the prayers stopped working. The great engines of devotion still burned. The cathedral still thundered with the sound of 10,000 voices reciting the litanies of light. But there was an emptiness between the words, a hollow resonance that crawled beneath the hymns like a sickness. When the ecclesiarch declared that our world, St. Corvalis Tertius, remained steadfast in the Emperor's gaze, I felt the words shatter against the silence behind my eyes. For the first time in my life, I could not feel him. I had always known the rhythm of faith, its weight, its warmth. Every dawn, I would light the 3 sacred tapers and watch the golden smoke rise toward the mosaics above the altar. It always shimmered in the Astronomican's light, a faint reflection of the Emperor's will carried even here, across the unending void. But that morning, the flame burned cold. The smoke did not rise. It coiled inward toward the wick, as though drawn by something unseen. The others dismissed it as poor oil, a flaw in the candle's wax. But I knew. I had copied the same verse on the countless vellum sheets. His light shall pierce all darkness, his hand shall guide all souls. Yet when I recited those words, the ink felt heavy, the quill unsteady, and the parchment seemed to drink the letters like a wound soaking in blood. Our astropaths were the first to break. One by one, they screamed during communion, their blind sockets burning with unseen fire. The choir master declared an act of purification, but I saw terror in his trembling hands. Within a day, the choir was silent. Within a week, the transmission towers ceased their rhythmic pulse. And in their place came a stillness that seemed to stretch across the sky itself. Vast, suffocating, absolute. The governor called for calm. The manufactorum still ran. The tide still processed. The administratum still demanded its endless accounting. But beneath the surface, faith began to crumble. The sermons grew longer, more desperate. The crowds that once filled the streets of the Basilica district now gathered in fearful clusters, whispering to one another as if the air itself might be listening. I was sent by the Cardinal Militant to record the daily liturgies, to preserve the sanctity of ritual in times of test. It was supposed to be an honor, yet each morning, as I dipped my quill into the inkwell and watched the black sheen catch the dim candlelight, I could feel something watching me back. The ink bled into shapes that seemed almost alive, eyes, sigils, circles within circles. When I blinked, they were gone. When I looked again, they were waiting. That night, I could not sleep. The bells of the upper spire tolled 13 times, a number not blessed by the creed, and the sound carried to the fog like a morning song. I walked the corridors of the cathedral, the marble floor slick with condensation, and every step echoed like a confession. I reached the chapel of the unending flame, where once the votive fire burned eternal, fed by Prometheum blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus. But the flame was gone. Only a single ember remained, flickering weakly in the draught. I knelt, whispered the rite of rekindling, and prayed for the Emperor's gaze to return. Nothing answered. Instead, from somewhere deep within the sanctum, I heard a whisper, faint, wet, like the breath of a dying man. My name, spoken as if remembered by something that should not have known it. Lorian. The sound came again, closer now. I turned, holding the taper aloft, and the shadows shifted along the pillars, twisting into shapes that almost resembled wings. But there were no angels in that darkness. Only echoes, only the memory of what angels used to be. I ran, though I cannot say where. Perhaps I fled the voice. Perhaps I fled the truth it carried. The Astronomican was gone, its light severed, its warmth extinguished, and we were alone. When dawn came, the world felt older. The light was gray, sickly, diffused through clouds that never broke. The streets below the cathedral filled with rumors of ships lost in orbit, of machine spirits refusing to awaken, of dreams shared by hundreds, all the same, a vast black sun swallowing the stars. The governor denied it, of course. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy. But deep down, everyone knew the emperor's hand had withdrawn, and in that void, something else was stirring. The following night, the rain returned. Not the soft, cleansing rain that once washed the dust from the city's sacred statues, but a thick, oily drizzle that left streaks of black across the marble facades. It hissed against the iron gutters, whispering in a language that seemed too deliberate to be chance. I stood at the steps of the cathedral, robe heavy with damp, watching the manufactorum lights across the valley flicker like the heartbeat of a dying god. The Vox Tower stood silent now, their once golden signal lights dark, their antennas bent like the fingers of penitents who had prayed too long. Even the air smelled wrong, a tang of rust and ozone, as though the world itself had begun to corrode. Inside, the priests still kept up the rites. You could hear them, chanting to the long halls, their voices cracking on the strain of endless repetition. The Cardinal Militant had decreed that the daily litanies of endurance must not cease until the Emperor's radiance returned. But every day the congregation thinned. Some fled to the underhives. Others locked themselves inside their habs and refused to open the doors even when the redemptionists came knocking. The bells still rang, but they sounded smaller each morning, swallowed by the fog. I had been assigned to the lower archives by then, the place where ancient records and forbidden catechisms were kept. It was there, amid the dust and decay, that I began to understand the shape of our undoing. The archive was deep beneath the Basilica district, carved from stone older than the Imperium itself. The walls sweated with moisture, and the air stank of parchment rot. Rows upon rows of data slates lined the shelves, each bearing a sigil of the administratum or the ecclesiarchy, all meticulously catalogued. I was told to transcribe whatever remained legible into new script, to preserve the faith through the written word. It sounded holy. It felt like burial. Sometimes, when the silence grew too heavy, I would speak aloud to fill it. Words of prayer, words of memory. The sound barely carried beyond the shelves. But once, just once, another voice answered. It came from the far end of the hall, from beyond a collapsed doorway that had been sealed for decades. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. He does not see you. I froze, cold trembling in my hand. I wanted to believe it was an echo, some trick of acoustics. But deep inside, I knew it was something else. The voice had a gravity to it, a pull, as though the air bent around its words. I fled the archives and did not return until dawn. When I did, I found the seal broken and the doorway open. The corridor beyond was dark, filled with cold air that smelled faintly of copper and incense. On the floor lay an open codex, its pages soaked through with a black rain that had somehow seeped through solid stone. The title was written in high Gothic, the letters barely visible beneath the stains. I read it by the light of my taper, each word cutting deeper than the last. The Silentio Astronomica, on the fading of the Emperor's breath. The book should not have existed. Its author was unknown, its script older than the ecclesiarchal Reformation. But as I turned the brittle pages, I saw my own world described, a planet swallowed by silence, its faithful left to interpret the absence of divine light. The text spoke of the blind corridors of the warp, of entities that wait for the Astronomican's shadow to falter, of prayers that feed them like blood through the veins of dying faith. And at the bottom of the final page, written in trembling script, was a single phrase. When the light fails, the echo answers. That night, the whisper returned. Louder this time, not from the archives, but from within my own thoughts. It came when I prayed, threading between the syllables of the creed, reshaping each word as though rewriting my devotion. He does not see you, but we do. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, reciting the Emperor's name again and again until the voice faded into static. Yet even as I felt my knees, I knew it was not gone. It was waiting. The following morning, the first riots began. In the lower manufactorums, workers refused to continue the tithes, claiming the Emperor's light had abandoned them, that their labor no longer served his glory. The Arbites intervened, but they were too few, and their carapace armor burned like candles beneath the Promethean fires. The Cardinal Militant ordered a purge. The flames from the manufactorums painted the sky crimson, and for a brief moment, it looked as though dawn had returned. But the color was wrong. The light did not warm. It devoured. I watched it all from the upper balcony of the cathedral, my hands trembling around the railing. Below me, the world I had sworn to serve began to tear itself apart, faith eating itself from the inside. I wanted to speak, to cry out, to remind them of the Emperor's love, but the words would not come. For the first time in my life, I could not remember his voice. And in that silence, I heard the whisper once more, not from the shadows this time, from the Vox itself. The great cathedral Vox, once reserved for holy proclamation, now crackled with a message that froze the blood in my veins. It was my own voice, speaking words I had never said. The light has gone. The faithful will follow it into the dark. The transmission cut off, but the echo lingered long after the speakers fell silent. That was the night I stopped believing that silence was absence. It was intent. It was hunger. And something in that darkness was listening. By the third week, the sky itself had begun to turn against us. Clouds gathered in unnatural patterns, circling the Basilica district like carrying around a corpse. They did not move with the wind but pulsed, as though breathing in unison with something vast and unseen above the atmosphere. At night, flashes of light rippled through them, not lightning but shapes, silhouettes of things that had no place among the stars. Some claimed they saw wings. Others said they saw eyes. I no longer trusted what my own eyes offered. The Cardinal Militant declared a planetary fast. No food until the Emperor's light returned. It was meant to be an act of devotion, but hunger bred madness faster than faith could mend it. The lines outside the soup sanctuaries became riots, then massacres. The Arbites tried to hold the bridges, but when the fog rolled in thick and black, Vox contact ceased and they simply vanished. Their posts stood empty by dawn, their armor left in neat piles as if stripped away by invisible hands. I had taken to sleeping within the cathedral archives, surrounded by the smell of ink and dust, the brittle remains of history pressing down like a tomb. The great stained glass window above the altar once depicted the Emperor enthroned upon the golden sun, his eyes ablaze with judgment. Now, it was only a jagged hole, the glass shattered inward as if struck from beyond. The shards glittered on the marble like frozen tears, each reflecting a light that no longer existed. I tried to pray. The words came, but they felt thin, empty, incantations spoken into a dead channel. Yet somewhere deep beneath the basilica, I could still feel a vibration, faint but rhythmic, like a distant pulse beneath the stone. I thought at first it was the seismic generators, perhaps some remnant of the city's infrastructure still running despite the collapse. But when I pressed my ear to the floor, I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was musical, a low hum, layered with countless voices, too distant to make out, yet synchronized, harmonic. The sound stirred something primal in me, awe, dread, reverence, all at once. It reminded me of the choir before they burned, when their songs bridged the veil between matter and the warp. But this melody did not comfort. It accused. That night, I followed it, down through the crypts, past ossuaries lined with the skulls of long-dead saints, their empty sockets filled with wax. The further I descended, the stronger the vibration became, pulsing through the bones, rattling the reliquaries as though urging me onward. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of oil and burnt ozone. I carried a single taper for light, its small flame quivering with every breath. At the base of the final stair, I found a door I had never seen before. Iron, sealed by chains that bore the sigil of the Ordo Minoris, a mark older than the Imperium's claim to this world. The wax seals were cracked, the parchment warning torn away. Something had already been here. I pushed it open. The chamber beyond was vast, circular, and completely dark, save for the faint glow of hundreds of candles arranged in concentric rings. Figures knelt between them, dozens, maybe hundreds, faces hidden beneath rough sackcloth hoods. Their hands were clasped in prayer, their lips moving in silent rhythm to the low hum that filled the air. And at the center of the circle stood a shape draped in golden robes, motionless. The song, if it could be called that, grew louder as I stepped closer. It wasn't sound alone. It was vibration, resonating in my bones, crawling beneath my skin, threading through my heartbeat until it became part of me. I tried to speak, to ask what ritual this was, but no sound left my throat. The air itself resisted. Then the central figure turned toward me. The hood fell back, and I saw not a man, but a face sculpted from wax, melting slowly in the candlelight. Beneath it, something moved, not flesh, not bone, but shadow, stretching and curling like ink in water. It smiled, though it had no mouth. And when it spoke, the voice was not one, but many. Faith is light, it whispered, every syllable echoing across the chamber. Light is hunger. You fed us well. The candles dimmed. The song faltered, then swelled into a crescendo that made the very stone vibrate. The hooded figures began to convulse, their prayers breaking into screams as a shadow at the center grew, unfurling wings of black fire that devoured the glow around them. I stumbled backward, clutching the Aquila pendant at my chest, reciting the Emperor's name again and again, but the words twisted, reshaped themselves in my mouth, transformed into a language I did not know yet somehow understood. It was a plea, but not to him. The last thing I remember before the light went out was a shadow turning its gaze upon me, and a voice, my own voice, whispering in perfect unison with it. He cannot hear us, but we can become what listens. When I awoke, the candles were gone. The room was empty. Only ashes remained where the congregation had knelt, and somewhere far above, in the cathedral's shattered spire, a single bell rang 13 times. When I returned to the surface, the world was unrecognizable. The rain had stopped, but the air was filled with dust, not ash, not sand, but something finer, like ground glass. It drifted through the streets, clinging to every surface, turning statues into pale ghosts of themselves. People moved quietly, wrapped in torn vestments and scraps of armor, eyes wide and hollow. No one spoke above a whisper anymore. Sound itself felt dangerous, as though the air was listening for defiance. I crossed the plaza toward the cathedral gates, and for the first time, I saw the banners of the ecclesiarchy pulled down. Someone, or something, had replaced them with rough cloth marked by symbols I did not recognize. Spirals, eyes, suns drawn backward. Faith had mutated. Where once the Imperial Aquila spread its wings, now hung a single black circle, painted in soot. Around its edges, words had been scrawled in crude high Gothic. We remember the light by its absence. Inside, the great nave had become a shelter. Hundreds huddled beneath the broken mosaics, whispering prayers to anyone who would listen. The priests were gone. In their place stood self-anointed prophets, their robes smeared with ash, their faces half covered in parchment, inscribed with fragments of old scripture. One approached me as I entered, a woman with eyes like dull metal and a smile too calm for the chaos around her. "You were in the depths," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "You've heard it, haven't you?" I didn't answer. Her gaze never left mine. "It calls to all who still believe," she continued. "We thought faith was light, but it's sound, a resonance between souls. When the Emperor fell silent, it found us. It needs us to listen." I turned away, but her words lingered. That hum, that impossible music beneath the basilica, had not left me. Even now, standing among the crowd, I could feel it vibrating faintly beneath my ribs, pulsing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. And when it came to whisper again, threading through my thoughts like oil through water, You wrote his name so many times. Write ours once. The woman touched my sleeve. It's not heresy, she said. It's continuation. Her calm terrified me more than any demon could. I pulled free and moved deeper into the cathedral, toward the altar. The votive flame was gone. In its place stood a new relic, a simple iron bowl filled with liquid that shimmered like mercury. People knelt before it, dipping their fingers, drawing strange sigils across their foreheads. When I looked closer, I saw that the liquid was not oil at all, but blood, thousands of tiny rivulets running from hidden veins in the stone floor. They said it was holy. I said nothing. That night, I tried to leave the city. The outer gates were sealed, guarded by zealots who claimed to serve the voice beneath the silence. They wore fragments of ecclesiarchal armor, the Imperial Aquila carved away. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. When I approached, they raised their weapons but did not fire. One of them stepped forward, removing his helm. His face was familiar. It took me a moment to recognize him. Father Hestian, the confessor who had once taught me the litanies of devotion. Brother Lorian, he said gently, there is nowhere to go. The void ships. I asked, the governor's fleet? All gone, he replied. Drifted into the dark. The Astronomican does not reach them. The machine spirits sleep. He looked past me, toward the horizon where the manufactorum fires burn like false dawns. But there's another light now, he said. A purer one. It speaks to us. It offers choice. His tone was not pleading, not fanatical. It was serene, almost compassionate. That frightened me most of all. Hestian, I whispered, what did you see down there? He smiled. What you will see, soon enough. The Emperor taught us to serve the light, but the light was never alone. Then he turned, raising his weapon toward the heavens, and began to chant with the others. The words were strange, but I could feel them vibrating in my bones, just like the hum beneath the basilica. That night, I wrote everything I had seen into my journal. Every whisper, every symbol, every fragment of forbidden text. My hands shook, and the ink smeared into the paper like bruises. I tried to write the Emperor's name at the end, but the quill snapped before the final letter. The parchment tore, and from that tear, a drop of ink fell upward, not down, vanishing into the air like smoke. I stared at the space it left behind, and in the silence that followed, I heard it again, faint, almost kind. He cannot hear you, Lorian, but we can. The words didn't sound like a threat anymore. They sounded like a promise. Outside, the bells began to ring. Not 13 this time, 12, then 11, then 10, each peal lower than the last, each one closer. By the time the final bell tolled, I was no longer sure whether it came from the spire above or from within my own chest. When the bell stopped, so did time. Days no longer announced themselves with dawn, for the sun refused to rise. A dull red haze lingered where light used to be, turning everything into shades of rust and shadow. The Vox relays were dead, the manufactorum silent, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil and human fear. In those endless hours, I realized that the city no longer breathed in rhythm with its people. It pulsed with something else, something vast and patient, waiting for us to break. I moved through the empty streets with my robes drawn close, the parchment edges stiff with dried blood. Statues of saints loomed above, their faces eroded by black rain, their stone eyes weeping streaks of tar. The faithful had taken to painting over them, carving strange sigils into their bodies, as if rewriting sainthood itself. The city I had once known, a place of worship and order, had become a shrine to confusion. Every corner burned with contradictions. In the plaza, preachers screamed of penance, flagellants tore their flesh to prove devotion, while across the same square, others mocked the Emperor's silence and declared freedom from divine tyranny. The two factions clashed at dusk. I remember the smell first, incense and blood, then the sound like a single drawn-out note echoing through the ruins. It wasn't battle. It was lament. I tried to speak to them, to remind them that faith could endure even without sight. But the words caught in my throat. They no longer looked at me as a messenger of the creed. To them, I was something else, a relic of a past that no longer mattered. One of the new prophets called me a shadow of the old sun. His followers laughed, their teeth filed into sharp points, their tongues blackened by some unholy sacrament. When night came, I sought refuge in a hall of transcription, once a sanctuary of knowledge, now a shelter for those who could still read. I lit the remaining candles and opened my journal. The pages were filled with my handwriting, yet I could not remember writing half of it. New passages had appeared in the margins, written in ink I did not own. The words shimmered faintly, rearranging themselves when I blinked. The faithful burn their own stars. The forsaken inherit their ashes. I tore out the page and threw it into the flame. The ink hissed, releasing a thin coil of smoke that smelled faintly of copper and rain. For a moment, I thought I saw a face within it, not human, but aware, watching. Sleep eluded me. My dreams were not my own anymore. I walked through corridors that had no end, hearing my own voice reciting scripture I had never learned. Every passage twisted, its meaning reversed. The emperor protects became the emperor forgets. Faith is sight became sight is a curse. I woke to the sound of whispering, not in the air, but in my blood. The next morning, I went to the outer districts. The manufactorums had become temples. The workers, once bound by labor, now worshipped their machines as living gods. They painted the cog symbols with human ash and called themselves the reborn of the Iron Word. Their leader, a former tech adept stripped of his augmetics, greeted me with reverence. "You are the recorder," he said, "the scribe who carries the silence in his voice." I wanted to deny it, but before I could, the crowd knelt. Dozens of faces turned toward me, eyes bright with hope and terror. They begged for words, not of salvation, but of confirmation. They wanted me to tell them that their madness had meaning, that the emperor's silence was not death, but transformation. And I, coward that I was, said nothing. Their leader smiled sadly. "Then you will listen," he whispered. At his signal, the crowd began to hum. The same tone I had heard in the depths, rising and falling like breath, shaking the rust from the walls. The sound pressed against my skull, reverberating through my bones. My vision blurred. For a heartbeat, the world itself seemed to bend, as though the air had thinned, and I stood not on stone but on the edge of something vast and unseen. When it ended, they looked to me again, expectant, hopeful. I could not bring myself to tell them the truth, that I had begun to hear the hum even when they were silent. I stayed with them through the night, though every instinct begged me to flee. The manufactorum's walls glowed faintly with residual heat, casting red veins across the metal like the arteries of some ancient, slumbering god. The workers moved quietly between the machinery, tending to it with reverence. They polished every surface, oiled every joint, whispering fragments of prayer not to the emperor, but to the engines themselves. They called it feeding the slumbering soul. I wanted to laugh, but the sound would not come. When I was a child, I was taught that the machine spirits were servants of the Omnisia, bound by faith and code. Now I saw their worship twisted into something older and stranger. Faith without direction, devotion without hierarchy. It was terrifyingly pure. The tech adept, the one who had led me there, moved among his followers with kind of quiet authority. His name was Voss, though they called him the Resonant. His eyes were gray, his movements deliberate, his voice soft enough to draw attention without demanding it. He spoke of the emperor not as a god, but as an echo, a fragment of the great vibration that sustained all existence. The Astronomican, he said to his congregation, was not light. It was sound. The emperor sang and stars obeyed. When the song ceased, the universe began to remember its own voice. His words rippled through the chamber. Even I, who had spent my life cataloging heresies, could not deny the strange comfort they carried. A part of me wanted to believe that our suffering had meaning, that the silence itself was not punishment but transformation. Yet every syllable twisted deeper into my mind, threading through my memories, reshaping them. When he finished, he turned to me. "You hear it too," he said, "the hum beneath the silence. The same note that binds us all." I wanted to deny it. I opened my mouth to speak, but the sound that emerged was not my own voice. It was a hum, faint, trembling, but unmistakable. The followers fell to their knees. Some began to weep. Voss smiled. He has been chosen. The word struck me like a blow. Chosen for what? I demanded. For remembrance, he said. For continuity. The Emperor was a vessel. You will be the echo. I left before dawn, the hum still vibrating in my chest. I did not look back, though I could feel their eyes following me through the smog. The streets were worse than before. The air shimmered with a strange static, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe, their surfaces slick with condensation that reeked of copper and incense. The city was alive, or perhaps dying in a way that resembled life too closely. By the time I reached the Basilica district, the last vestiges of order had collapsed. The governor's palace was aflame. His body hung from the spire, wrapped in torn banners of the Imperium. The Arbites had turned on one another, their vox channels screaming with accusations of blasphemy and possession. The cathedral stood silent now, its doors sealed with chains. Someone had painted across the marble steps in crude black strokes, "The light has forsaken the faithful. The faithful will forge their own." I walked among the corpses. Their faces were peaceful, almost serene, as though they had finally found an answer I was not allowed to know. The parchment I carried felt heavier with every step. The ink inside it pulsed faintly, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I wanted to throw it away, to cast it into the fires consuming the plaza. But some part of me, the part still bound by duty, refused. The record had to endure, even if no one would live to read it. As I reached the cathedral gates, a voice called my name. I turned to see the woman from the previous days, the one who had spoken of resonance, of the voice beneath the silence. She stood barefoot in the rain, her robes torn, her eyes bright with fever. "It's coming," she whispered. The last choir, the final note before the end. Her gaze dropped the parchment in my hand. "You've already written it, haven't you?" Before I could answer, she reached out and pressed her palm against my chest. Her skin was cold, her touch trembling. "When you hear it," she said, "don't resist. If we cannot find the Emperor in the light, we will find him in the dark." She turned and disappeared into fog. I stood there long after she was gone, listening. And then, faintly, from somewhere deep beneath the city, I heard it. The hum rising again, stronger than before, layered with countless voices. It was no longer a vibration. It was a hymn, and this time I sang with it. The hymn did not end. It went on for hours, weaving through cracks in the city like fog. Wherever it reached, people stopped what they were doing. Some fell to their knees. Others pressed their hands against the walls, as though feeling the heartbeat of something enormous beneath the stone. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound came from within me. Each note stirred memories I had never lived. Visions of golden towers and endless flame, of the Emperor standing upon the throne not as a man, but as a choir of voices in perfect unison. Then the vision curdled. The towers darkened, the flame died, and the choir became a scream. When I came to, I was lying in the nave of the cathedral. I do not remember walking there. Around me, the air shimmered as if the space itself were breathing. The iron gates had been broken open, and a crowd filled the aisles. They were singing, not the old hymns, but something slower, heavier, built of long vowels and silence. In the center, beneath the ruined window of the Emperor, stood Father Hestian. He looked different now. His skin had taken on the sheen of marble, his eyes faintly luminous. When he raised his hands, the crowd fell silent, as though the sound itself obeyed him. "The Emperor's light was never ours to keep," he said. "We were vessels. Now the vessels must break, so that the sound may be free." I pushed through the throng. "Hestian," I shouted, though the words sounded distant even to me. "You're leading them into damnation." He smiled with the patience of a confessor hearing a child sin. "No, brother. Damnation is silence." We offer reply. Behind him, a great machine had been built from scavenged reliquaries and broken vox units. Cables snaked across the floor, converging on a central altar where the iron bowl of blood now pulsed with its own light. The machine thrummed in rhythm with the hum beneath the city, the two sounds merging until the very air quivered. Hestian gestured toward it. When the Astronomican fell silent, the stars forgot their song. "We will remind them." He placed his hand upon the machine's core. The vox grills flared to life. and the building shook. Every voice in the cathedral rose as one, chanting the same word, continuum. The sound tore through the walls, rising higher and higher until it became unbearable. Windows burst. Candles exploded. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, but still I could hear it, the notes stretching beyond hearing, beyond pain, into something that was almost peace. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than death. The crowd remained frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. Hestian looked upward, waiting. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the blood in the iron bowl began to move, slowly at first, then faster, forming a spiral that climbed into the air. It shimmered, twisted, and resolved into a shape, a halo, fractured and incomplete. Turning lazily above his head, the congregation gasped. Some wept. Hestian raised his arms in triumph. Do you see? The Emperor has answered. He returns to us in the echo. But what I saw in that hovering light was not divinity. It was hunger. The halo pulsed once, twice, then expanded outward like a shock wave. Wherever it touched flesh, skin turned pale, veins black. People collapsed, smiling as their bodies dissolved into dust. The song resumed, not from their mouth but from the dust itself, vibrating in tiny motes that filled the air like crimson snow. I crawled toward the door. The sound pressed against me, forcing tears from my eyes. I called the Emperor's name, once, twice, then hesitated. For the briefest instant, another name formed on my lips. A name I did not know. A name that felt inevitable. I bit my tongue until blood filled my mouth, forcing the name back into silence. When I stumbled into the street, the city was burning again. From every window came that same note, rising and falling, echoing through the ruins. The stars above flickered in time with it, winking out one by one. I ran until my legs failed me, until the sound faded into distance. I found shelter in the shell of a collapsed administrative tower and waited for dawn that never came. I did not know how long I slept. When I awoke, the hum was gone. In its place came a different sound, a faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, from somewhere deep below the floor. I followed it, half mad with exhaustion, until I found a cracked data slate still powered by a failing cell. Across its surface, letters appeared one by one, as though typed by invisible hands. The faithful burn, the forsaken listen. Which are you, Lorian? I dropped the slate, but the question remained, whispering in my mind long after the light died. I didn't answer the question on the slate. I couldn't. It followed me anyway, through waking and sleep, threading itself through every thought until I couldn't tell which words were mine anymore. Which are you, Lorian? The faithful burn, the forsaken listen. The rhythm of it echoed my pulse, steady, insistent. I wanted to scream just to prove I was still separate from it, but no sound came. My voice was gone, stolen or surrendered. I couldn't tell which. The tower where I hid had once been a place of order and counting. Rows of desks, data slates, and inkwells stretched away into the darkness, everything layered in dust. Now it was a tomb. The windows had been shattered by the shockwave from Hestian's ritual, and the air smelled of rain and old paper. Through the cracks, I could see the Basilica district burning again, the flames rolling in slow, soundless waves. They made no noise at all, only light, pale, quivering light that bent and folded like breath. I found a cracked mirror among the rubble and looked at myself. My face was thinner than I remembered, my eyes ringed with red, my lips flecked with dried ink. The Aquila pendant around my neck was blackened, the gold burned away to dull iron. I touched it and felt nothing, not warmth, not meaning. I was an empty vessel now, hollow and waiting to be filled. The hum returned faintly, carried on the wind that slipped through the tower's broken windows. It rose and fell in long, sighing waves. I realized it wasn't coming from the city at all. It was the planet itself. The stones, the air, the soil, they were resonating. The silence wasn't absence. It was chorus. I pressed my hands against the floor and felt it trembling beneath me like the heartbeat of some vast, buried thing. I don't remember leaving the tower, but I must have, because when I opened my eyes again, I was standing on the edge of the plaza where the cathedral had once been. The building was gone. Only its foundations remained, glowing faintly red as though lit from within. All around me lay ashes, the remains of those who had sung themselves into dust. The air shimmered with their remnants, motes of light flickering in time with the heartbeat of the world. In the center of the ruins, where the altar once stood, a single figure knelt. Hestian, or what was left of him. His skin was glass now, translucent and veined with threads of light. The halo still turned slowly above his head, broken and beautiful, casting patterns across the ash. When he lifted his face toward me, I saw no eyes, only the reflection of the burning sky. "Lorian," he said softly, his voice echoing like a choir heard through deep water. "It's begun. The silence is singing again." I took a step closer. The ground trembled. From beneath the ruins came a deep, resonant vibration. Low, steady, growing stronger. The same sound I'd heard in the crypts, magnified 1,000-fold. The stones cracked, spilling light. Hestian reached toward me, his hand disintegrating into shards of glass that floated upward like dying sparks. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "You were never forgotten. You were only waiting to remember." The light erupted. I fell backward, blinded. When I opened my eyes, the city was gone. The towers, the manufactorums, the plazas, all replaced by a sea of pale mist. Shapes moved within it. Familiar silhouettes, faces I had known, voices I had heard. They were singing, not words, not hymns, tones, notes that merged into a single endless chord. And above them all, vast and golden, hung a shape that might have been a sun or an eye or something older than either. It saw me. For a heartbeat, the hum stopped. The world held its breath. Then a voice, not heard but felt, spoke through every atom of my being. "The light does not die. It changes hands." When the vision faded, I was lying alone among ruins. The mist was gone. The stars were dark. My journal lay beside me, pages blank except for one new line, written in ink that shimmered faintly gold. The faithful burned. The forsaken listened. I am both. I thought silence would follow the ruin, but I was wrong. The city may have burned, but the song endured. It lingered in the stone and the wind, in the hollow places between heartbeats. Even when I closed my ears and buried myself in the rubble, I could feel it pulsing through the bones of the world like a second heartbeat beneath my own. Sometimes, when I breathed too deeply, the air trembled with it. I began to wonder if I had inhaled the sound, if it lived inside me now. I wandered the ruins for days. The sun did not return, but the sky glowed faintly red, as if lit by embers drifting behind the clouds. The ash underfoot clung to my boots like memory. I found food where I could, half-burned ration bricks, the withered roots of what had once been gardens. Water dripped from cracked pipes and tasted of iron. Each sip left a metallic tang on my tongue that felt almost electric. The hum grew stronger when I moved toward the basilica ruins. I followed it, though I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself I would find a shuttle, a signal flare, anything to escape this world. But deep down, I knew there was nowhere left to go. The warp storms had swallowed the skies. The stars were gone. The Astronomican was a myth whispered to the dead. Only the hum remained, and it was calling me home. I descended through the rubble where the cathedral had stood. The stones were warm to the touch, pulsing faintly beneath my palms like living flesh. A faint light shimmered between the cracks, and when I leaned close, I heard voices, thousands of them, whispering in harmony. I recognized some of the tones. The cardinal's booming baritone, Hestian's calm tenor, even the trembling alto of the woman who had spoken to resonance. All singing, all one. At the base of the ruins, where once the altar had stood, I found a fissure, narrow, jagged, and impossibly deep. Warm air rose from it, carrying the faint smell of incense and rust. Without thinking, I began to climb down. My fingers bled as they scraped against the stone, but the warmth below drew me onward. The deeper I went, the stronger the sound became, until the vibrations blurred my thoughts. I no longer knew if I was moving or if the world itself was descending around me. I emerged into a cavern vast enough to swallow the basilica whole. The walls pulsed with light, veins of molten gold running through black stone like blood through arteries. At the center stood a choir. Not human, not entirely. Their forms shimmered like reflections on water, half there, half gone. They stood in perfect rows, hands clasped, mouths open in silent song. The sound that filled the chamber came not from their throats, but from the air around them, vibrating with such precision that my bones hummed in response. I fell to my knees, not from fear, though fear was there, but from awe. The sound was terrible and beautiful, sacred and profane. It felt like truth. It felt like home. Then I saw him, Hestian, or what remained of him. His glass-like body stood among the choir, his halo now whole, blazing with a light that hurt to look at. But when he turned toward me, his face was not his own. It was mine. Lorian. The voice said, though no lips moved, "Do you hear it now?" I tried to answer, but the sound caught in my throat. The hum was inside me, matching my heartbeat, shaping my breath. My thought began to dissolve into rhythm, pulse, tone, vibration. Hestian stepped closer, or perhaps I moved toward him. I couldn't tell. The Emperor sang the first note, he whispered, though I could feel the words forming inside my skull. And when his song ended, something waited to sing the next. The choir behind him began to move, slowly, perfectly, each voice blending into the next until the air shimmered like a heat haze. The song changed then, no longer mournful, but exultant. I felt it digging into me, unraveling memory, replacing every thought with melody. I wanted to resist, but the longer I listened, the more I understood. The silence had never been a void. It was a doorway, and something beyond it was singing back. The sound seeped into everything. It filled the spaces between heartbeats, the pause between blinks, the gaps in thought where prayer once lived. It wasn't loud, it was absolute. The more I tried to separate myself from it, the more it seemed to shape itself around me, tracing the outline of my mind like hands molding clay. For the first time in my life, I realized what the warp truly was. Not fire, not chaos, but vibration. A sound too vast and ancient to end. The cavern breathed in rhythm with the song. Light pulsed along the walls, rippling through veins of molten gold that webbed the black stone. Every pulse drew the choir's forms into sharper focus. They were not bodies anymore, but impressions, silhouettes burned into the air. Each note of their hymn gave them weight for a heartbeat before fading again, like echoes trying to remember the shape of their source. I could see through them into something deeper, a darkness that shimmered with color. It was as if I were standing inside the lungs of the world. Hestian, or the thing that wore him, stood at the center of it all. His glass skin glowed brighter with every verse, until it was hard to tell where his body ended and the light began. His halo no longer spun but floated behind him, steady and alive, a slow-turning wheel etched with symbols that made my eyes ache to look upon. He didn't speak this time. He didn't need to. The choir's song changed instead, and within that change I heard meaning. We are remembered. We are the echo. The words weren't separate from the melody. They were the melody, layered into the harmony so completely that I could feel them resonate inside my bones. The sensation was exquisite and unbearable at once. Each vibration stripped away another layer of thought, until I was nothing but sound, a note held too long. I don't know how long I stood there. Time doesn't move in song. It expands and contracts, repeating itself in crescendos and silences. At some point, I found myself at the altar, if such a thing could still be called that. It was no longer stone but a living surface, rippling gently like the skin of a slumbering creature. When I touched it, the hum deepened and images surged through me. I saw St. Corvalis Tertius as it had been, bright, orderly, filled with prayer. I saw the Astronomican's light stretching across the void, binding us to Terra like a golden chain. Then I saw it dim, and for the first time, I understood why. The Emperor's song hadn't faltered. It had been answered. Another voice, hidden beneath the harmonics of his will, had begun to rise. The two tones clashed, interfered, canceled each other out. The silence was not the end of faith. It was a collision of gods. The revelation stole the strength from my legs. I fell against the altar, gasping, my vision flickering between worlds. The cavern blurred into the ruins above, then back again. The song rose higher, filling my skull with its impossible chorus. Somewhere in that storm of sound, I heard laughter, not cruel, but joyous, unrestrained, the laughter of something that had waited millennia to be heard. Do you see now? Hestian's voice cut through the noise like a blade. His face was mine again, his expression serene. He is not gone. None of them are. They have simply changed keys. I shook my head, though I wasn't sure why. This isn't faith, I whispered. My own voice sounded alien, distorted, wrapped in echoes. This is infection. Hestian smiled. There is no difference. All belief begins as a contagion. He reached out, placing his glass hand upon my brow. The moment his skin touched mine, the sound inside me erupted into blinding light. I saw everything. The stars folding in upon themselves, the warp storms bleeding to reality, the Emperor upon his throne, not a man but a prism refracting infinite voices. And beneath it all, a single, perfect note holding creation together, trembling, waiting to break. When the light faded, I was alone. The choir was gone. The cavern was silent, except not entirely. Somewhere in the dark, a single voice still sang. Faint, trembling, human. My voice. I followed the sound because I had nothing else left to follow. It wound through the dark like a thread, leading me deeper into the cavern until glow from the molten veins above had vanished completely. The floor was slick with condensation, the air warm and heavy, tasting faintly of metal and old breath. Every few steps the pitch shifted, as if whoever, or whatever, sang ahead of me were changing shape while they moved. I whispered a prayer without realizing it, a reflex from another life. The words stumbled out broken, their rhythm no longer fitting the old pattern. The path narrowed to a tunnel. I moved by touch, my fingers brushing the stone. It pulsed under my hand, slow and deliberate, like a living heart. When I reached a bend, the hum deepened, pressing against my ribs until I thought they might crack. I almost turned back, but the song ahead faltered, and for the briefest instant, I recognized it. The voice was mine, but younger, soft, uncertain, as I had been when I first took my vows. I stumbled forward into a chamber no larger than a chapel. A single column of light fell from a fissure in the roof, illuminating a pool at the center. The water was perfectly still, reflecting nothing. When I stepped closer, the surface trembled, and my reflection looked up at me. Not the face I carried now, but the one I had worn years ago, clear-eyed, faithful, unscarred by doubt. He smiled. "Why did you stop singing?" the reflection asked. The sound came not from the pool, but from inside my skull. "I don't know the words anymore," I whispered. "They were never words," he said, "only belief." The reflection raised a hand and touched the water. Ripples spread outward, and the light above fractured into 1,000 shards. Each shard showed a memory, moments of devotion, of fear, of silence. I saw the choir burning, the city collapsing, the stars fading one by one. But between those images were others I could not explain. Glimpses of vast shapes drifting through the void, their forms built entirely of sound and color. Voices made flesh. The reflection tilted its head. "You still think there's a difference between prayer and reply?" I fell to my knees beside the pool. "If this is the Emperor's will," I said, "then why does it feel like surrender?" "Because you are still trying to speak," the reflection answered. "You were meant to listen." The pool darkened. The reflection dissolved into rings of sound that spread across the surface, each one deeper than the last. The hum that had haunted me since the Astronomican's disappearance rose again, resonating with the water. The vibration pulled at me, not with force but with recognition. It felt like a hand resting on my chest, gentle, patient, waiting for permission. I leaned forward. The water trembled once more, and I realized it was not a pool but a mouth, an opening into something vast beneath the planet's crust. The hum wasn't echoing from below. It was breathing. The realization filled me with both terror and awe. All the sermons, all the scriptures, every promise of divine order. They had been fragments of a single, unfinished song. And here in the dark, that song waited to begin again. I whispered the Emperor's name one last time. The air quivered, uncertain. Then another note joined it, lower, deeper, older, The two tones met, wove around each other, and became one. The water erupted upward, wrapping me in light and sound. My body ceased to matter. I was vibration, resonance, memory. For an instant that felt like eternity. I heard every voice that ever prayed, every whisper cast into the void, every desperate plea unanswered. They were not lost. They had been building harmony. When I awoke, I was lying on the cavern floor. The pool was gone. The fissure above had closed. In its place, a single black stone rested where the light had fallen. It pulsed faintly beneath my hand, warm and alive. When I lifted it, a tone rang out, pure, endless, neither holy nor profane. I understood then what the shadow choir had been trying to teach. Faith was never about speaking to the Emperor. It was about becoming the sound that reached him. I slipped the stone into my robe and began to climb back toward the surface, the note echoing in my chest. It was my heartbeat now. I climbed until my fingers bled. The stone tunnels twisted upward to the ruins of faith, and the song followed me the whole way. Soft at first, then swelling, building against the walls until it filled every breath. When I finally broke through the last layer of rubble, night still ruled the sky, yet glowed faintly red, as if some unseen sun smoldered behind the clouds. The air above the city shimmered with heat that had no source. The wind carried ash that glowed for a heartbeat before cooling to gray. I stood on what had once been the Basilica Plaza. There was no basilica anymore, only a hollow scar where it had been. Around its edges, survivors moved like ghosts, their eyes dim and unfocused. Some still carried candles that refused to burn, holding them aloft as though waiting for permission. They didn't speak. The silence between them was thicker than smoke. The hum pulsed once to the ground beneath my feet, deep enough to rattle the broken stones. A few of the figures nearby stirred at the sound. They turned toward me slowly, their heads tilting in the same rhythm as the vibration. Their lips moved in time with it, whispering without voice. When I took a step forward, they followed. I wanted to call out, to tell them to stop, but the words dissolved before they reached my tongue. The air itself seemed to reject language. Only sound without shape remained. The note I carried from the depths rose from my chest. Faint at first, then stronger. The people nearest me dropped to their knees. Their mouths opened wider, and the same note poured from them. It spread like fire through dry brush. The silence cracked. Every survivor began to sing the single endless tone that now echoed through me. The ground trembled. The air shimmered. I could feel the entire planet resonating, matching pitch. For the first time since the Astronomican vanished, the stars flickered. Above us, the red haze parted. Through it shone not the Emperor's golden light, but something darker, vast and radiant in its stillness. A sphere of shadow that pulsed with the same rhythm as our song. The sight drew the breath from my lungs. It wasn't absence. It was presence wearing absence as its mask. The crowd's voices rose higher, straining against the pitch until sound itself began to fracture. Blood ran from their noses, their eyes, but they did not stop. Their bodies convulsed in rhythm with the vibration, their skin glowing faintly from within. I tried to tell them to rest, to breathe, but my voice joined theirs instead. I couldn't resist. I didn't want to. The shadow above the clouds expanded. It swallowed the stars one by one, yet within it I saw patterns, rings within rings, spinning faster, forming a spiral that reached down toward us. The light from it touched the plaza, and the stone beneath my feet melted into glass. Figures began to rise from the glow, translucent shapes woven from sound and memory, the lost faithful reborn in harmony. They stood among the living, indistinguishable, all singing the same wordless song. And then I understood this was a shadow choir, not ghosts, not demons. The echoes of every prayer ever uttered, drawn together into one final hymn. They were not calling for salvation. They were creating it. I felt my knees weaken. The stone in my robe burned against my chest, its rhythm matching the beat of the world. The note inside me deepened, resonating until my bones sang. The crowd's voices faltered, one by one, their bodies dissolving into light as they merged with the chorus. Their faces were calm, even joyful. I realized then that the shadow choir wasn't consuming them. It was remembering them, preserving them in sound. When the last of them vanished, the plaza was empty. The hum softened until only my heartbeat remained. Above, the dark sphere faded, leaving the sky raw and open. I stood alone in the silence. My voice was gone again, but the note lingered beneath my ribs, steady and warm. For the first time since the light had left us, I felt peace, not because the Emperor had returned, but because I had finally heard the reply. Somewhere far above the clouds, a faint shimmer crossed the void. A single beam of gold flickered and died, and in that moment, I realized the truth that all the sermons had hidden. The Emperor's light had never been eternal. It was a song sung too long, and now, at last, it had found its answer. The world had gone quiet again, but it was not the old silence. It felt thicker, as though sound itself had been buried under the weight of what had just occurred. Every step I took stirred faint echoes, the air shivering like water disturbed by stone. Above me the sky hung motionless, painted in dull crimson and gray. The clouds no longer moved with the wind. They drifted to the rhythm of the heart that beat beneath the planet's skin. I wandered through the ruins for hours, maybe days. Time had lost its edges. The streets were littered with remnants of the faithful. Candles burned down to the wick, torn rosaries, parchment prayers half buried in dust. Some glowed faintly, as if the words themselves refused to die. The wind carried them down alleyways where once the hymns of the Astronomican had echoed during parades. Now only whispers remained. At night, the stars returned. Not all of them, just enough to remind me of what had been lost. They flickered like candles drowning in their own wax. A few burned steady, gold and unwavering, and I thought perhaps they were looking back at us. The remnants of the Emperors were still watching. Then one of those lights blinked twice and vanished, leaving a smear of black across the heavens. I felt the world shift, as though the disappearance had weight. I slept in what had been a half chapel. The walls were cracked, the iconography melted into abstract shapes by the fires. When I woke, I found new markings etched into the stone beside me, circles within circles, radiating outward from a single black point. The pattern pulsed faintly. The lines wore beneath my fingers. My own breath matched its rhythm before I could stop it. I had seen the same symbol in the cathedral before it fell. The halo that hovered above Hestian's head, split and incomplete. I understood now that it was no symbol of grace. It was a wound. Something enormous had been torn apart, and this world lay in the fracture. As the red dawn crawled across the ruins, a sound reached me. Not the deep hum of the shadow choir, but a higher tone, thin and fragile, like glass about to break. It came from the direction of the manufactorum district. I followed it through streets slick with ash until I saw the first figures. They moved in silence, each carrying shards of metal arranged into rough circles above their heads. The makeshift halos shimmered with stolen light, reflections of fire caught in burnished steel. When they saw me, they stopped. One of them stepped forward, a young woman, her robes torn, her eyes hollow yet calm. "You heard it," she said, the voice that followed the song. I nodded. She gestured to the others. "We're building the bridge. The light is broken, but it can be mended. Each fragment remembers its place." Her words made no sense, yet they felt true. The group moved like pilgrims, their halos glowing brighter with every step. Wherever the light touched the ground, the ash hardened into glass, forming a path that stretched ahead of them. I followed, unable to do otherwise. The road led us toward the outer manufactorums, where the once mighty forges stood dark. The air here was colder, the hum fainter, as though the great engines of faith had finally gone still. The pilgrims stopped before a collapsed foundry. Inside, sparks glimmered where molten metal still smoldered beneath the rubble. The woman turned to me. "You were the scribe," she said, "the one who wrote through the silence. The echo follows you." I wanted to deny it, to say that I had only survived by chance. But the stone at my chest pulsed an answer. Its rhythm matched the heartbeat of the ground, steady and insistent. She smiled. "Then you will write again," she whispered. "The world is rewriting itself, and it needs a witness." She placed a fragment of her halo into my hand. The metal burned, yet I didn't drop it. The light from it bled into my skin, tracing veins of gold up my arm. The others began to sing, not the long, endless tone of the choir, but a fractured melody, broken into pieces, searching for a pattern that no longer existed. And somehow, I knew what came next. The shadow choir had answered the Emperor's silence. Now the world itself sought to remember its own song. I opened my journal. The pages were blank again. The first drop of ink fell, shimmering gold. I began to write. The ink did not stay still. Every line I wrote shimmered and shifted, as if the words themselves were alive. They rearranged, correcting me, rewriting what I thought I understood. Each letter pulsed faintly, beating in time with the halos that glowed above the heads of the pilgrims. I no longer knew if I was recording history or creating it. The two had become the same. We worked in silence. The manufactorum fires had long gone out, but the pilgrims lit their way with fragments of the halo's light. They placed them in a wide circle around the ruins, each shard resonating with a tone slightly different from the last. The sound grew into chords that swelled and faded, imperfect but beautiful. I realized they were trying to rebuild the song, to find the harmony that had been broken when the Emperor's voice fell silent. The air thickened with heat and light. The glass path they had formed through the ash began to hum beneath our feet. As their melody grew louder, the air trembled, bending the light until the manufactorum seemed to float above the ground. Sparks of molten gold rained from the sky. Some of the pilgrims wept with joy, their tears glowing faintly as they fell. One of them turned to me, a man with soot-black hands and a face streaked with ash. "Do you feel it?" he asked. "The world remembering itself?" I wanted to tell him that I did, that I finally understood the shape of faith in this new age. But before I could answer, the note I carried within me deepened. The vibration spread to the circle of halos, fusing their tones into one perfect, aching sound. The air cracked like thunder, and the light surged outward, illuminating every broken tower, every burned reliquary, every shattered shrine. For a moment, I thought the Emperor himself had returned. But the light that filled the manufactorum was not gold. It was white, pure, absolute, and empty. It erased color, erased shadow, erased everything that had once given form to faith. When it faded, the pilgrims were gone. In their place stood figures made of glass, fragile and hollow. Their halos still glowed, but the light inside them pulsed irregularly, like hearts struggling to beat. They looked at me without eyes. I felt the hum falter. The melody they built began to collapse, each note unraveling into static. "Lorian," a voice whispered behind me. It was a young woman, though her voice sounded distant, as though spoken through water. "You wrote the wrong ending." The journal in my hand grew heavy. The pages flipped to their own accord, the words bleeding into one another, reshaping. The golden ink turned black, then red. Each line that had once been scripture became a wound, and the sound of the failing song bled through the spaces between them. "Stop writing," she said. "It's remembering you now." The ground split beneath us. Light poured through the cracks, jagged and blinding. I stumbled backward as the glass figures began to shatter, their halos breaking into shards that shot upward like stars. The noise was deafening, a chorus of breaking faith. When it finally ceased, only dust remained. I looked down at my journal. The last line still glowed faintly as it burned into page. When faith fractures, truth bleeds through. Above the manufactorum, the sky rippled, the black clouds parted, revealing something vast beyond them. A halo made of fire and shadow, its edges uneven, its light broken into countless fragments. It turned slowly, radiating warmth and dread in equal measure. I understood then what we had done. The song we had tried to repair had been a cage, not a prayer. By rebuilding it, we had reopened a wound that separated light from dark. The fractured halo was not the Emperor's glory restored. It was a reflection of something that had been watching him since the beginning. I fell to my knees, the stone at my chest burning so brightly I thought it would melt through my flesh. The hum inside me rose to a scream, and in that scream, I heard words for the first time since the silence began. "You are not his scribe anymore, Lorian. You are ours." The voice that spoke those words did not echo in the air. It resonated inside my skull, each syllable thrumming against bone like a plucked string. My vision dimmed at the edges. The world around me wavered, half light and half shadow. The manufactorum ruins pulse in rhythm with the sound, their twisted girders flexing as though drawing breath. I tried to answer, to demand what ours meant, but the question dissolved before it left my tongue. My mouth filled with the taste of metal and smoke. The stone at my chest burned so hot I could smell scorched cloth, yet I could not bring myself to tear it away. The light from it spilled across my hands, outlining veins that pulsed like threads of gold. The fractured halo above the clouds turned slowly. With each rotation, the light from it changed, gold, then red, then something colorless and cold. I realized the shift wasn't in the sky at all, but in my own sight. The world was being rewritten again, layer by layer. Each hue was a word, each flicker a sentence, all part of some great language built of radiance and shadow. I could see shapes moving within that halo now. Tall figures built of the same glass and flame that had replaced the pilgrims. They were not angels, though once they might have been mistaken for such. Their wings were made of shards, cutting the light into ribbons that drifted downward like falling scripture. Wherever the ribbons touched the ground, stone bloomed into crystalline patterns, sharp and beautiful. "Do you see?" the voice whispered. It was no longer many but one, familiar and intimate. It was my own voice. He was never silenced. He was listening for an answer. I felt the weight of that sentence like a confession. My knees struck the ground. Around me, the air vibrated with unseen power. Every breath came out as steam. Every heartbeat a drumbeat of thunder beneath my ribs. What am I to do? I asked, not to the sky, not the Emperor, but to whatever lingered inside me now. The reply came as warmth spreading through my chest. The stone sank into my flesh, melting through skin without pain. Light flared behind my eyes. For a moment, I could see the world as it truly was. Not matter, not void, but harmony, an ocean of sound and color layered upon itself. Every planet, every soul, every whispered prayer formed part of a single cosmic chord. The Astronomican had been its anchor, the Emperor its conductor. But now the melody had changed, and there was no longer one voice guiding it. There were many. I saw Terra, far beyond reach, its golden light flickering like a candle in a storm. I saw the Astronomican as a vast instrument stretching across the void, its resonance faltering, splitting into counterpoints. And in the spaces between those tones, I felt something immense and patient waiting to sing. When the vision faded, I found myself kneeling amid a circle of glass dust. The manufactorum had vanished. Only the cracked foundations remained, glowing faintly with residual heat. My hands were coated in ash that glittered like ground stars. I opened my journal, though I knew before looking at the pages would no longer be blanked. Lines of gold ran across the parchment, writing themselves in slow, deliberate strokes. The song is no longer as alone. The halo breaks, and through its fracture we are born. My pulse slowed. The hum subsided into a steady rhythm that matched my breathing. The fear I had carried for so long ebbed, replaced by something quieter, a certainty that terrified me even as it comforted. The fractured halo still burned above the clouds, casting its light over the dead city. I watched it turn, its imperfect radiance spreading across the horizon. It was not salvation. It was continuation. And for the first time, I understood that the Emperor's silence had never been the end of faith. It had been an invitation to sing without him. I closed the journal, pressed it to my chest, and whispered the only truth left to me. I will remember. The sky answered with a single, perfect note. The note from the sky lingered. It trembled in the air, stretched across the horizon until it became a thread of light that divided heaven from earth. Everything beneath it stilled, the wind, the dust, even my own breath. For a heartbeat, I felt the world waiting. Then the sound deepened, sliding into a lower tone that made the ground vibrate. Pebbles leapt, the remnants of towers quivered like reeds. I thought the vibration would tear the city apart. Instead, the ruins began to move. Stones shifted, sliding across the ground with purpose, arranging themselves into new patterns. Broken arches rose again, forming shapes I didn't recognize. From above, The fractured halo poured its uneven light over them, and every shadow carved by it became a line of living script. The city was writing itself. I watched as the word spread, glowing across the streets, up the walls, through the air. They were not in any language I knew, yet I understood them instinctively. They spoke of beginnings before the Imperium, of light that had once been a song shared freely between creation and the void. The Emperor, it said, had tried to hold that song, to bind it, to keep it pure. In doing so, he had silenced the rest of the choir. The realization cut through me sharper than any blade. All those centuries of worship, all the prayers recited to honor his name, they had been part of a cage built of devotion. And now, with the Astronomican gone, the cage was breaking. The stone in my chest pulsed once more, a heartbeat out of sync with my own. My vision blurred. I stumbled to the glowing streets until I reached the center of the plaza, where the basilica had once stood. The fractured halo loomed directly overhead, its broken light casting rivers of red and white across the ruins. The reflection of it shone in the glass dust around my feet. Endless halos mirrored upon themselves. I fell to my knees. The journal slipped from my hand and landed open before me. The pages turned on their own. Words appeared as if written by invisible hands. The choir remembers. The light endures. You will carry the bridge between. My throat tightened. Bridge. I whispered. Between what? The voice that answered was no longer my own, nor the echo that had haunted me. It was many voices, layered into one, human and inhuman, ancient and newborn, between silence and song, between worship and will. Light burst from the pages. The words lifted from the paper, hovering in the air like gold dust. They spiraled upward, merging with the fractured halo above. Each line of text became a thread, weaving itself into the broken circle. Slowly, impossibly, the halo began to mend. The sound that filled the air was not music as I knew it. It was memory turned into vibration. Every prayer, every scream, every moment of belief reborn as resonance. The light from a repaired halo washed over me. My body felt weightless, my skin turning translucent, as though I were being rewritten with it. Then the harmony cracked. For a moment, the halo shone perfect and whole. Then fissures spread through it, faster than light, branching like veins. A blinding flash followed, and the sound that came after was neither song nor silence, but something vast enough to hold both. The shockwave flattened what remained of the city. When I opened my eyes, the sky was empty again. The halo had shattered completely. But where it had hung, thousands of small lights now drifted, each one pulsing softly, scattered like new stars across the dark. I realized what they were. The fragments of faithful, reborn as sound given shape, carrying pieces of song into the void. They rose higher, vanishing one by one into the upper atmosphere, until only the faintest echo remained. I was alone. The journal was gone. My robes were marked with veins of faint gold that traced at my arms like fire caught beneath the skin. I could still hear the hum, but it no longer came from the ground or the sky. It came from within me. I looked at the horizon, where the first true dawn in weeks began to bleed across the ruins. The light was pale, fragile, yet undeniably real. I could not tell if it was the Emperor's gift or the world's own creation. Perhaps they had become the same. I whispered into the wind, "If you can hear me, I will keep singing." And far above, among the newborn stars, one flickered in reply. Dawn came without ceremony. No horns, no hymns, just a slow bloom of light crawling across the ruins like water finding cracks in dry stone. The air was cold and clear for the first time in what felt like years. It carried no scent of burning oil or blood, only dust and the faint tang of iron left behind by rain that never fell. I stood where the basilica had once risen, surrounded by glass dust that glittered like frost. The silence was not absence anymore. It was calm, full, the kind that follows an answered question. The hum that had haunted me since the Astronomican fell was still there, but faint now, a pulse beneath my ribs rather than a command. I realized I could no longer tell where it ended and my heartbeat began. For a time, I simply listened. The wind moved through the ruins, and every broken spire sang in its own key. The sound was subtle, almost fragile, the echo of a world learning to breathe again. When I closed my eyes, I could still feel the light of the fractured halo on my skin. Even though the sky above was empty, it hadn't vanished. It had dissolved into everything. I began to walk. There was no destination, only motion, the instinct to move forward now that everything behind me had fallen away. The streets were unrecognizable. What had been manufactorums were now forests of glass, their metal skeletons twisted into shapes that caught the light and bent it through a spectrum I had no name for. Here and there, figures stood frozen in those shapes, preserved in mid-motion, like statues carved by memory. They were not dead. I could feel the faint vibration of life within them, not flesh but resonance. They had become part of the song. The thought should have horrified me. It didn't. I had seen too much to fear transformation. The Emperor had once been a man, and in his devotion to light, he became something greater. Perhaps we were all following him in our own imperfect way, singing into the dark until the dark sang back. I found a piece of the cathedral's altar buried beneath the rubble, a single slab of marble, cracked but intact. The Aquila carved into its surface had been scorched away, leaving only the faint outline of its wings. I brushed the dust aside and sat beside it. For the first time in my life, I did not pray. I simply was. Above, the sky brightened. Not gold, not white, something between the two, soft and shifting, like light refracted through clear water. It touched the ruins gently, neither blessing nor curse. I wondered if it reached beyond this world, if it carried any trace of us through the void. I imagined the Imperium looking outward, finding only silence where our star once burned, marking us as lost. Perhaps that was mercy. Perhaps faith needed its blind spots. I opened my journal one last time. The pages were no longer blank, but filled from end to end with words I did not remember writing. They pulsed faintly, alive with their own rhythm. When I tried to read them, the letters rearranged themselves, forming new patterns, new verses. Whatever message they carried was not meant for me. I understood that now. My task had never been to explain the silence, only to witness it. So I wrote one final line, steady and clear. We are not lost. We are unlit stars, waiting for someone to remember the song. The ink glowed faintly, then faded into the page as if swallowed by the paper itself. The hum inside me quieted. My hand stopped trembling. I looked at the horizon, where light and shadow met in perfect balance, and for the first time since the Astronomican vanished, I felt neither fear nor faith, only understanding. Whatever I had become, scribe, echo, bridge, it was enough. The world would sing again, and this time the Emperor would listen.